Hi, I'm pleased that today we kick off this year's professional development work with important conversations about anti-racism and a sense of belonging for our students and staff. As we, in some cases, begin this conversation today, or in other cases, continue the conversations that have been ongoing, it is critical for each of us to be fully engaged in this dialogue. There is not a right or wrong answer to the conversations that we're having, but a right way to engage, and that is with an open mind and a clear heart to learn and grow and consider varying perspectives, new thoughts, and complex opinions. While some have politicized these conversations around the nation in the past several months, please know that these conversations, this professional development, is not political, but about the heart of the student experience. Every one of us across all departments and all buildings has ownership in this. Take a moment to think about what it looks like and feels like when you belong. This is what we want for our students and staff. When we create conditions that promote a sense of belonging, we create conditions for everyone to flourish. Today and the subsequent professional development days will empower us to use our voice and give our students and staff both the conversations they deserve instead of silence. I ask you to consider how you will take today's and this year's conversations and use them to provide a more welcoming feeling and a sense of belonging here at Olentangy. Not only will we be empowered, but we will gain skills to have these hard conversations and in the end, continue to live our mission to facilitate maximum learning for every student. Thank you.
Today's expert presenter is Dr. Hasan Jeffries from Ohio State University. Born in Brooklyn and a graduate of Morehouse College, Dr. Jeffries earned his PhD in American History, specializing in African American history at Duke University. Dr. Jeffries joined the faculty at OSU in 2003. Not only is he a professor and researcher by day, but he is also an author, the Teaching Hard History podcast host, and lead historian for the National Civil Rights Museum renovation at the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. In addition, Dr. Jeffries is a long-standing district partner. He has engaged in collaborative work with our social studies teachers, led parent workshop sessions, and presented at our One Community conference. He also started a Teaching Difficult Subjects K-12 Institute at OSU that a cohort of our teachers are currently engaged with. We are looking forward to learning with and from Dr. Jeffries today and gaining new insights and perspectives on the topic of understanding the history of race and racism. For this first video, part 1, The Moment, we're asking that you listen to Dr. Jeffries through the lens of curiosity. And what this means is that we hope you'll listen to understand, that you'll listen with the willingness to be surprised, and that you'll listen by letting go of any assumptions you may hold.
Hello, I'm Dr. Hasan Kwame Jeffries, Associate Professor of History in the Department of History at The Ohio State University. The title of my presentation is Confronting Hard History, Teaching and Talking about Race and Racism in K through 12 classrooms. And this is part one, the moment. We are living in historic times. The demonstrations that we have seen this summer across the country are larger than any other demonstrations in United States history. In early June, some 25 million people took to the streets in consecutive days. During the height of the Civil Rights Movement, the largest demonstration was the March on Washington, and that only had 250,000 people. It is important to point out that these demonstrations under the banner of Black Lives Matter are seeking most immediately justice for the victims of racial violence, justice for the victims of police violence, whether it be Ahmaud Arbery or George Floyd or Breonna Taylor. But the demonstrators are also seeking recognition of Black humanity, which is why we have seen these beautiful murals appearing across the country and dotting the landscape, declaring that Black Lives Matter, demanding that Black humanity be acknowledged and recognized, because for so long in United States history, it has been denied. But these protests are also seeking something else, and that's where we come in as educators. These demonstrations are also demanding an honest accounting of the American past, which is why we have seen in so many places, such as in Richmond, Virginia, demonstrators demanding that Confederate monuments and memorials dedicated to white supremacy be removed. These, of course, are modest demands, but they are quite meaningful, because what these demonstrators, who are overwhelmingly young people, are demanding is that for once and finally, we acknowledge the past in an honest and truthful way. Because for so long, we have not done that. There are elements of the American past, which I call hard history, that we as a nation have refused to confront directly. Now, hard history, which usually involves elements of race, as well as marginalized and oppressed people, it includes aspects of our past, our collective past as a nation, that make us uncomfortable about the present. So, for example, the era of slavery, the era of Jim Crow, both of these periods were undergirded by racial violence and racial terror. And the legacies of both are still with us today and help frame the world in which we live. Hard history is those aspects of our past that are hard to think about, hard to talk about, hard to teach, and yet it is imperative that we do. But instead of confronting hard history directly, we tend to do one of three things. We tend to pretend that things just didn't happen, that actually did. We have purposeful historical amnesia. We like to think, or say, too many of us like to say, that the Civil War was fought about states' rights, rather than what it was actually fought about, which was preserving the institution of slavery. We tend to rationalize evil. We look back at historical actors, even some of the giants in American history, such as a George Washington or James Madison or Thomas Jefferson, and when confronted with the fact that they, for example, enslaved people for the entirety of their adult lives, we attempt to rationalize it away by saying things such as they were just men of their times, people of their times. They just did what everyone else did. Well, the reality is, of course, that there are millions of enslaved African Americans who are living during the same times who would have fundamentally agreed or disagreed with their position. And if we don't want to accept the voices, thoughts, and ideas of black folk, of folk who were in bondage, then we could listen to the friends of those people who we are trying to rationalize and justify their behavior. Washington, Jefferson, Madison, they all had boys, close friends, who told them what they were doing was wrong. They understood the immoral nature of slavery. But rather than us confronting that, we attempt to rationalize it, to make us feel good about the legacies of slavery, rather than dealing with its consequences. And then lastly, we tend to create false narratives. We just make stuff up. That's what the whole lost cause about the Confederacy is, that this was somehow something other than a traitorous act. This was something other than rebellion against the Constitution. This was something other than a war for the preservation of slavery. The problem with these responses, in addition to just being wrong and incorrect, is that they perpetuate myths and misconceptions that promote racial bias and reinforce inequality today. So our avoidance of hard history actually creates problems, exacerbates the problems that we see in society. So where should we begin? If we want to confront hard history, if we want to tackle the past in honest ways, where should we begin? Well, we have to begin with an understanding of race. An understanding that is race as a concept, as a construct, just simply isn't real. Race is biologically meaningless. There is no scientific, there is no biological difference of any real significance between anybody on Earth. Under a microscope, we are all the same. Yet, race is socially meaningful in that it has structured global society for the last 500, 600 years. It has created hierarchies. It has been the basis for generating wealth for some and enslaving others. It is the basis for our social hierarchy today. So while race is biologically meaningless, it is socially meaningful, and it is also culturally relevant because we use race, especially in America, as a stand-in for cultural inheritance, as a stand-in for ancestry. And because of these last two components, because race has structured society, because we use race as a stand-in for cultural inheritance and cultural ancestry, we have to avoid the colorblind trap. We cannot pretend that we don't see race. Although race isn't real, and our students need to understand that, this is the starting point for having any conversation about race and racism and teaching it. We can't simply say, well, because it's biologically meaningless, that we need not address it, that we need not talk about it, certainly in the present, because it still impacts and influences our lives, and most importantly, it's a reflection of who we are. And so when someone approaches me and says, well, you know what, I don't see race, I'm colorblind, what they have effectively done is erase me. They have erased my parents and the experiences that they had that led to who I am. They have erased the experiences that were so central to my grandparents coming up and growing up during the Jim Crow era, and great-grandparents who lived 1 foot in slavery and 1 foot out of slavery. There is nothing shameful about that past. In fact, I am proud of the fact that my ancestors, the folk who came before me, endured the worst that the world had to throw at them. And so saying that someone is colorblind is in fact erasing an aspect of me that is so central to who I am. And in addition, psychologists tell us that children as young as 2 and 3 months old are able to or begin to distinguish and identify people by race because they're picking up on the cues and clues, the signals of their parents and caregivers. So the reality is we all see race. And there's nothing wrong with acknowledging race, especially because we use it as a stand-in for culture. The only problem is when we discriminate against people on the basis of race. While race isn't real, we have to understand the role of racism because racism is real. And racism manifests itself in personal ways as prejudicial beliefs and behaviors that are exhibited through explicit bias in explicit ways, prejudice that is blatant and intentional, using the N-word, using derogatory language, for example, and also in implicit ways. The subconscious and unintentional beliefs that we have because we have grown up and because we live in a world that is still framed and informed by racist stereotypes. But racism doesn't just manifest itself in these personal ways, it also manifests itself in structural ways. And this is critically important that our students understand that when we're talking about racism and its harmful effects, that we're talking about its source as being both personal and structural, ways in which racism is embedded in the systems and structures of society, economic systems, political structures, social systems. And we have to be clear about these different manifestations of racism. Because if we're not clear about what we're talking about, the source of racial inequality, the source of racial discrimination, then we can't come up with adequate solutions to it. If we think, for example, that the principal problem in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963 was the racist sheriff, Bull Connor, well, then the solution is quite simple. All you have to do is remove the sheriff. But we know from history that simply removing the sheriff did not end racial inequality in Birmingham, Alabama, because racial inequality was rooted in the economy of the city, was rooted in the politics and political structures of the city, was a part of the laws that govern people's behavior. Well, thank you very much. Hello, I'm Dr. Hasan Kwame Jeffries.
So at this time, we would like you to get into your small groups and think about this quote and discussion question. So Dr. Jeffries mentioned that our avoidance of hard history actually creates and exacerbates problems we see in society. So for you to think about, how has the current moment been shaped by issues we typically avoid discussing? See you back soon.